When Karen Donay-Jones was charged with using her work credit card for a packet of painkillers and a bandage, she thought common sense would prevail and the charges would be dropped, but instead she had to fight it in court. Eventually, 5 stealing charges were dismissed. In her time as the Chief Executive of the Southern Tasmanian Sexual Assault Support Service, Ms Donay-Jones was hailed for vastly improving the help available to victims of sexual assault. She's now focused on clearing her name and has told Stateline she was the victim of workplace bullying, which she believes ultimately led to the charges being laid against her. As Lucy Shannon reports, Tasmania Police has decided to review their files on the case.
When you have criminal charges against you and you're a person of honesty and integrity, that's very distressing. And so I guess sleeplessness and, feeling depressed and watching my kids suffer.
Karen Donay-Jones says she's slowly starting to get her life back on track.
How you going, Belle?
Her ordeal started 7 years ago when she got the job as Chief Executive of the non-government organisation, the Sexual Assault Support Service, or SAS. She was thrilled.
I'm very, very committed to the issue of sexual assault. I think it's a hard subject for people. Most people want to avoid it, but it's incredibly common in our community.
Within 3 years of being at the helm of SAS, she won a doubling in funding from the state government. That saw staff numbers more than double and the number of people getting help grow from 250 a year to 1,000. She also brought about a major shift in SAS policy, opening the doors to men for the first time.
Any boy in Hobart that was over the age of 12 couldn't actually access any specialised services in sexual assault. And I found that absolutely gobsmacking.
The decision to allow men was not supported by all in the organisation, particularly its board. And at first, Ms Donay-Jones agreed to see all the male clients herself. She was ruffling feathers internally, but in the sector, she was a hero.
Karen was an absolute rock and a fountain of knowledge, and to lose somebody of her experience and passion it is so sad and it is so unjust.
During the state election campaign of 2006, the Lennon government thought it might be in electoral trouble. Karen Donay-Jones was putting a lot of pressure on for extra funding, highlighting the millions of dollars allocated to the Elwick racecourse compared with very little for sexual assault victims. In the end, Labor bowed to the pressure and promised to double funding to almost $1 million. At the time, SAS board member Kerry de Grassi was a Labor candidate.
The conflict of interest issue is really at the heart of it. She should have stood down. She shouldn't have been chairperson throughout that time.
Ms de Grassi put out a Labor Party press release celebrating the funding.
Which was a bit hard to swallow given for the board and I, for the fact that we'd had difficulties with her even getting her to support us in that week.
Kerry de Grassi agreed to stand down as chair 3 months later, but she remained on the board. Almost a year after the funding boost, Ms Donay-Jones went to a work conference in New Zealand and broke her leg. It resulted in a number of months' leave and a successful workers' compensation claim. When she returned to SAS in early 2008, she was shocked to discover that the board had promised to return some of the hard-fought-for funding to the state government. She had been fending off such requests for a while.
I'd had calls from the various bureaucrats asking for the money back, or some of the money back, which I found quite disturbing, and would flatly refuse because every cent really had been budgeted for.
In a statement, the Deputy Secretary of Human Services, Alison Jacobs, says about $90,000 was requested and returned. She describes them as unexpended funds. Ms Donay-Jones says she was then asked to accept a board member as her executive assistant. She didn't think they were qualified for the job.
So I think at that moment, when I asked him to withdraw his application, the risk of then having some retaliation was ever present, and after that, my relationship with the board started to deteriorate after that.
She says she was bullied and harassed. She was slowly getting off crutches and suffering stress. She started to think about quitting her beloved organisation.
That's when I decided, well, I just need to say what's really going on here, because, otherwise you just walk away and no one knows what really happened.
So at the SAS AGM that year, she not only outlined the achievements of the organisation, but also her concerns about the operation of the board.
I didn't just get up at the AGM and try and throw a bucket of cold water over the board. I had been suffering a fair degree of bullying for that 6 months prior to that. Bullying like I've never experienced in my life.
She says as a result of her airing the concerns, she felt she was being pursued.
I had staff coming to me and telling me that whenever you left the building, the board were coming in, they were trying to find something on you, they were asking about whether you'd ever touched the MYOB system, had you ever touched the computer with the finances.
Not long after she made her complaints at the AGM, she was told by the board that there were 4 bullying allegations against her from staff members. Dino Atavi, who's a specialist in cases of workplace harassment and bullying, was her advocate.
There was a plan, and the plan was to ensure that in every way Karen was not to survive this.
Despite years of dealing with workplace disputes, he was shocked.
For me, Karen's case is the worst case I've dealt with and I've seen.
Former Family Court Judge Michael Hannon had just become a board member of SAS at the time. It was agreed he would inquire into both sets of bullying allegations. But he resigned in disgust after a decision was made without his knowledge that board members Kerry de Grasse and Annie Humphreys would conduct the inquiry instead. In a letter tendering his resignation, he said to have members of the board against whom allegations had been made by the CEO interview staff members who've made allegations against the CEO is contrary to natural justice and could be subject to legal challenge. He also said to have the brother of Ms de Grasse, Michael Whittle, give advice to the board on procedure was not only a conflict of interest, but contrary to natural justice. He finished by saying he could not be a part of an organisation that didn't act in accordance with natural justice in relation to its senior employee. The outcome of the investigation was a finding of gross misconduct, and Karen Donay-Jones was sacked. Ms Donay-Jones says her claims of bullying were never investigated. She made an unfair dismissal claim in the Industrial Commission and 4 months later reluctantly accepted a settlement to help her family move on. About 3 weeks later, the police knocked on her door. Instigated by the board of SAS, police charged the 47-year-old with 5 counts of stealing.
I couldn't believe it, and I said, what were the personal items? I said, he said, they're claiming that Nurofen, a packet of Nurofen, is one of the charges. It was worth about $5, and the other charge was a packet of Elastoplast, which I used to tape my kneecap into place because when I had injured my leg, my kneecap no longer sat in the right spot.
Last month, Magistrate Chris Webster dismissed the charges, saying there was no evidence to suggest dishonesty. Roland Brown was Karen Donay-Jones's lawyer. He was frustrated with the tenor of the police investigation. For example, one charge related to the use of the SAS credit card for a parking ticket issued in work time. The NGO's policy was that such tickets could be paid by the organisation.
The investigating officer had no knowledge of that document at all. He'd never seen it.
He'd even said to me, he said, I'm not really sure about this case. He said he'd gone to a senior police officer and he'd been told that he had to continue with the case.
This morning, Tasmania Police told Stateline it was reviewing the case files as a result of the concerns. After being charged, Karen Donay-Jones approached all sides of politics for assistance. She says she was told she would have to wait about 9 months for a meeting with the then Human Services Minister, Lynn Thorpe. Ms Thorpe denies this.
She's a long-term friend of Kerry de Grasse. I know that they've been friends for 30 years, both in the Labor Party, obviously. But even still, as a minister, you expect some level of impartiality.
Ms Thorpe refutes the allegation she acted impartially. The Shadow Minister at the time, Brett Whiteley, has told Stateline he was so concerned that he contacted the Auditor-General, Mike Blake. Mr Whiteley says he was worried money meant for sexual assault victims was being wasted on a potential witch hunt. Last year, the Department of Human Services conducted an independent audit review of SAS. The report concluded that SAS had good governance arrangements. The government also says it's received assurances from SAS that funding for service delivery wasn't used for legal expenses. Stateline asked Cabinet Secretary Cassie O'Connor if she was satisfied with those assurances, and in a statement yesterday she said that she would now meet with the board to substantiate them. Ms O'Connor also describes Karen Donay-Jones as a person of great integrity and sincerity. Abuse campaigner Steve Fisher has joined Ms Donay-Jones's calls for an inquiry into the saga.
I believe myself that this will may be politically motivated, and as I said, we need to find out why such a ridiculous case was brought against a woman who was doing such a fantastic job.
He says the ones suffering the most as a result are victims of sexual assault.
The services that are provided are not anywhere near like they were when Karen was CEO.
Yesterday, the ABC received a letter from lawyers representing SAS saying Kerry de Grasse was unwell and unable to be interviewed. The letter said that there's no basis for any allegations of improper conduct by her or impropriety by the Sexual Assault Support Service. The lawyer said it was SAS's belief that Karen Donay-Jones' motivation in taking part in the Stateline program was to attempt to harm Ms de Grasse and the service.